Hi, my name is Kevin McKnight. I will be presenting uh, for this assignment. We're going to be talking about operating systems and firewalls. So just a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be going over Microsoft Server 2019, Ubuntu Servers 20, the LTS version, Windows firewalls, IP tables, which is Linux firewalls, and then hardening techniques for those servers to kind of boost their security up. So Windows servers are different from the regular Windows Office operating system. They may look very similar, but there are in fact some differences. Windows servers typically is used by big businesses for managing their servers. So Windows servers comes with a service manager application and also an admin center to control almost every aspect of a server uh, through a web interface. When setting up your server, window will ask you to pick what they call roles, and each server will basically be dedicated to one role. If you have multiple roles in one server, it could get a little sloppy. So some examples of those roles include a Action Directory, a dynamic host configuration protocol, which is just DHCP for short, and also a print server. So a Action Directory is basically a tool that is used to manage users' accounts, their computers, printers, file shares, and just a bunch of different other things. The purpose of Action Directory is to handle security authentication across the domain. An example of this would be permissions. In Windows, you can kind of set permissions for different accounts. And as a big business, there may be different files or documents that you don't want every employee to have access to. So to kind of secure them, you can set different permissions for your employees' accounts. Um, so they can't have access to those documents, and so they will also only be able to access documents that they may need for their specific job roles. Another example of a different role would be a dynamic host configuration protocol, or DHCP. This protocol is helpful for big businesses as it automatically assigns IP addresses to devices that are connected to a network. Uh, so without this, a server admin may have to configure each device separately, which could just take forever. Especially, when you're working with a big business. Say, for example, if you're working with Microsoft or Apple, as many employees that they have, if someone had to go through and config, not only work devices but also personal devices that may need to be connected to a network, it could just take a long time. And another really useful role um, that can be assigned to a server is a print server. So this allows a business to cut down on the redundancy of setting up a printer for every single new device. The device will only need to be connected to the server, and that will basically allow it to print, from that device. Ubuntu Server is also an operating system used for managing a server. The LTS stands for long-term support, and I think Linux will support this particular version until 2025. But anyways, I like Windows. Ubuntu is an open source software which basically allows users to change things within the operating system, giving the users much more control over the machine. In Windows, you can't do this because it is closed source. So Ubuntu servers are also cost efficient, as anyone can download it and use it on as many devices as they see fit, versus Windows servers, which requires you to have a licensing, for each version. Ubuntu servers can basically perform all the same functions as Windows servers, but something that most users may find a little off-putting is that Ubuntu servers does not have a GUI, or a graphical user interface. which means that pretty much everything is performed through command lines, which can be, you know, it may make some people uncomfortable just seeing a black screen and a bunch of lines. So Windows firewalls come installed by default on most licensed Windows products. It is enabled by default to block any um, ports that may cause trouble in unprotected Windows systems. So Windows Firewall is used to protect the system from network-based threats, and through the firewall, the interface, the user interface, you can control who has access to your system and also what access is being granted. Um, you can configure your firewall settings in the interface. So two of the options that you may see when accessing the firewall from the control panel per se is check firewall status and allow a program through Windows Firewall. In the check firewall status, you can see if your firewall is enabled or disabled. Um, and you can also see firewall settings for incoming connections or notifications for the firewall system. In the allow a program through your firewall Windows firewall setting, you'll find a lot more detailed things you could play around with. So here you can see which programs are currently being allowed through a firewall, but you can also change their permission to block those programs. And a user can also add a program to this permission table, so that program can be allowed through the firewall. Okay, so IP tables is a command line um, firewall that uses policy chains to manage its network's traffic, and that's to allow or block traffic off. So IP tables come pre-installed in most Linux systems, and it uses three different chains to manage network traffic. So these chains are input chains, forwarding chains, and output chains. So input chains is used to control the behavior of incoming connections. For example, if another user tries to set up a secure shell on your PC or server, or with a PC and server, then IP tables will attempt to match the IP address in the port to a rule in the input chain. The next example is forwarding chain, and this chain is used for incoming connections that aren't actually being delivered locally. So the way that I kind of think about this is like a router. So with a router, the data is always being sent to the router, but the data that really is the data's final destination. So the router is always forwarding the data to another target. And then there's output chains. And so output chain is used for outgoing connections. An example of this is trying to ping a website, and IP tables will check if the output chain or check the output chain to see what the rules are regarding that ping and how that website is before making the decision to allow or deny the connection attempt. So the last thing we're going to go over is hardening techniques. So there are three ways to harden your system. The first is patch vulnerabilities. And so with these, you want to make sure that you do it immediately. There's a lot of different programs nowadays that have regular security updates for them, and it's important to monitor these updates and make sure that they are kept up to date to reduce the possibility of them being exploited in the future. The next thing I want to go over is just your network hardening, which is basically just your managing of your firewall. And so with your firewall, you want to make sure that is properly configured and all of the rules are being monitored regularly. This could include blocking any unused ports, disabling any unnecessary protocols or services, and then also encrypting your network data would help a lot too, or your network traffic would help a lot. And then the last thing is just eliminating unnecessary accounts. So, as an admin or whatnot, especially in a big business, you're gonna see, you know, employees come and go, and so it's gonna be important to make sure that you remove those accounts or limit their privilege to prevent them from accessing things that they no longer necessarily need access to.